Let's go out to the guest line right now. Welcome in a national championship linebacker, played his college football at Ohio State, and now does a kick-ass job for NBC Sports. That is the great Josh Perry. Josh, always appreciate the time. Thanks so much for it. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me.
All righty, let me start you off with Indiana, and then we'll get into all the other craziness from college football. They go to Oregon. I think people like Indiana going into the season based off what they did last year, but there were some unknowns. There were some questions of regression. They're going to be undefeated in the regular season. They're probably going to be in the Big Ten championship game, and they showed you over the weekend that they could beat any team in the country. What an impressive showing by Curt Cignetti.
I think we have to get comfortable as a college football viewing public of asking the question, could Indiana be the best team in the country? And I know it feels like a loaded question. You've got Ohio State up there, and talent just takes over with them, and it feels like they haven't even hit their top gear. Miami has looked phenomenal, and I love the way they're built from the lines of scrimmage on both sides. But I look at Indiana. They've got a quarterback who's playing as well as anybody in Fernando Mendoza. He's probably going to be a first-round pick, might be the first quarterback taken. They've got two wide receivers who I think are really good players too, and Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper. And oh, by the way, their defense is dominating people. What their defensive line did to Oregon, I think, is the thing that should wake people up. I think when you look at the previous champions in Georgia, in Michigan, and Ohio State, they had dominant defenses. And this was an Oregon quarterback, and Dante Moore, who had only been sacked one time heading into that game. He was sacked 6 times. They had their way. They were able to stop the run. It's one of those teams where, you know, people look at the logo and they want to discount them. They look at the talent makeup and they want to discount them. And going into Autzen, which is one of the most difficult places to play in college football, none of that mattered. So I think we have to get comfortable saying, despite the fact that it's Indiana, and despite the fact that they don't have 5 stars all over that roster, they could be the best team in the country. And I agree with you. They're going to be in Indianapolis as an undefeated team, and we'll see what happens there.
And you know what was so impressive about that one? It's not only going on the road and getting the victory, but they throw that pick 6, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's how this is going to unravel for them, and Oregon's just going to find a way to make the plays, and they march right down the field, and they put the ball in the end zone. I already knew they were a tough team, but that's like the true definition of toughness that we saw out of them on Saturday.
I feel like their experience at Kinnick earlier this year was where you kind of develop that grit. And I know Iowa's not a great team, but you can ask any of the top teams in the Big Ten. Kinnick is a house of horrors. You can go in there as a good team and come out with the loss. And they didn't play their A game. And there was a similar interception late in the game by Mendoza. He had pressure coming in his face. It's probably my biggest criticism of him is when he sees and feels pressure, he won't step into the throws. Threw it to Iowa, and that was like, oh my gosh, this might be the upset brewing. And then he had 0 pressure later in that game. He had a one-on-one that he liked, big explosive pass. They end up winning. It's a team that knows how to bounce back. I think they're so used to being underdogs and feeling like their back is against the wall anyway that they get into these game situations and they're so unfazed. But it's been impressive. And oh, by the way, Curt Cignetti, I know we'll talk about Penn State and where they might want to go in terms of coaching. Try to find me a better coach in college football right now. And I love Kirby. Think he's a great coach. Ryan Day proved to us a year ago that he is the coach that people wanted him to be. Curt Cignetti is doing a hell of a job with that program. And I've mentioned all the obstacles they're up against. He doesn't care. He's a little bit of a psycho, and I love that about him.
You know what it kind of reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of Mike Leach. That's the vibe I get with him.
Yeah, I feel it. I think there's a lot of that where, you know, like what he does in the media and how I think a lot of times can speak to his team through the press conference is really impressive. Having played for Urban, I get that edge that he has and that attention to detail that shows up. Seems like he's a philosopher in the way that Jim Harbaugh was at times too when he's talking to his team. So he's got a really unique blend of like these leaders that just figured out ways to get their team to play their best on game day.
Josh Perry here with us. All right, so let's get to Penn State because you brought him up. Let's start with Franklin first. I've been saying for 2 years I thought it was time to move on because I just didn't believe he could win the big game. I understand it. He is a really good coach. He did some awesome things, but I just don't see how anyone could really have an issue with after these 3 losses, and this was supposed to be an all-in year for them for Pat Kraft saying goodbye to his football coach yesterday.
I don't see the issue either. I talked about it on social media. Like the idea that they got rid of him, the idea of the timing is not a question to me. To your point, this 3-game stretch, and it felt like The Oregon game was the one. They put everything in for the offseason to try to win it. Didn't go their way, and they had a lead in overtime, by the way. Didn't go their way, and they just never bounced back. They started complaining about the long trip, and we're a little bit banged up, and we got to go to the West Coast. UCLA, of all schools, has their get-right game against Penn State, and then they come back home against Northwestern, who, by the way, is not a great football team, and they struggle through that one. I think the Andy Kotelnicki hire will go down as one of the worst offensive coordinator hires, in my opinion. I don't think the guy knows how to call plays. And Jim Knowles just is not a guy who takes a ready-made defense and has them ready to play right away because his system's so complicated. So there were a lot of missteps there. But I don't want people to forget, I do think James Franklin is a really good ball coach. Sure. And I'm looking at a job like Virginia Tech. I think he'd be perfect because James Franklin's a builder. He took Penn State in a really tough era and got them to a place where half of his seasons there were 10-plus wins. He has over 100 wins as a coach at Penn State. I think the second most wins, tied for second in Penn State history, right? Like, this is a good football coach. I don't think he's the guy that gets you over the mountaintop. And that's kind of the problem that they've had the last few years. It felt like he got them as far as he could take them, and it makes sense that they would split. And James Franklin kind of alluded to it after the Northwestern game. I'm not sure that he's so disappointed that he has an opportunity to go build something elsewhere.
Talking to Josh Perry. So now we get to who could replace James Franklin. The two names that have been talked about the most in the last 24 hours are Curt Cignetti and then also Matt Rhule. Do you think either would make the jump from their current Big Ten schools to Penn State?
So I'll say this before I get into that. I think this is a hell of a spot to be in if you're Penn State. Because as we saw, the floor with James Franklin, 500. The ceiling that you were butting up against was that 10, 11 win ceiling. Now that becomes your floor. The coach that you hire has to win the national championship. You gave 50 million reasons why he has to win a national championship. Going to the semifinal and losing by 3 isn't going to cut it anymore. So this is a spot where you could screw it up more times than you would get it right. You mentioned two guys that should squarely be in that conversation. I went over why I love Cignetti. Do you leave Indiana, who is putting resources behind your program? They're paying you $8 million a year. They gave you $11 million to hire staff. And by the way, if you have a 5-7 season, nobody's going to be crying because they're not used to winning anyway. Do you leave that in the position where you're at right now, a direct path to the playoff? It'd be 2 years in a row that they'd be in the college football playoff. To go to Penn State, understanding that target is going to be on your back. National championship, which is a narrow scope of success. For Matt Rhule, there is a lot of connection there. He is friends with Pat Kraft. That is well documented. Those two guys have a ton of respect for one another. I don't know if I'd want to go work for my friend. I wouldn't want to be fired by my friend. I wouldn't want to get my friend fired. It's a little bit of a weird thing. And again, Nebraska is looking at potentially 10-win season, could make it to the playoff this year. I think they're going to have to say no, either one of them. The offer is probably going to be something that will be extremely enticing. Penn State, to me, is a weird spot where I think the expectation is high, maybe a little bit outsized for the history of that program, only 2 national championships. And I know Penn State fans hate hearing that, but you know, this is kind of what it is. And I think the top 2 guys are maybe going to look at their spot and say, got it kind of good here. Don't know if I want to jump.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is interesting, and I know Matt very well. I was at Temple when I knew of Pat Kraft and Matt Rhule before anybody else knew them. I think I'm not saying he won't take the job, but he's at Nebraska, and he saw what happened, and I know Matt has a lot of confidence in himself, and he should, but he saw what happened when Scott Frost went to Nebraska, right? And I understand Scott Frost is a bigger legend in college football than Matt Rhule was at Penn State. Matt was a walk-on, but he now knows that's a very difficult spot, and it could maybe ruin the memories for Scott Frost. So I wonder, is really going back to your alma mater that attractive in case it doesn't work out?
I've always said if I got into coaching, I would never want to be the head coach at Ohio State. Like you become disenfranchised with the team that you love. Coaches get hired to get fired. There are very rare times where a coach leaves on their own terms. They're usually pushed out the door. They're told, here's the money, you can leave. And so that probably sits in the back of his head from people talking to people who know Matt Rhule very well. He likes it in Lincoln. His wife likes it in Lincoln. Like, I think they like where they're at right now. Nebraska's making the investment into the program with facilities. The biggest thing for him going back home is huge. Recruiting is going to be 100 times easier. It's difficult to recruit to Nebraska. It's an outpost. It's hard to get to. I know Penn State is not like the airport and the runway James Franklin always complained about. Maybe they'll build a bigger airport for the next coach. But like you can get there a lot easier and you're closer to elite talent. So it's going to be a draw for sure. But there are some obstacles when it comes to this hire.
So ultimately, you're saying it's probably not going to be Cignetti or Rhule if you had to take a guess right now?
If I had to take a guess, I think that one of them is going to see the combination of the money and the investment and the opportunity to succeed there and would probably do it. I think it's going to be a little too enticing to turn down, but I don't think it's a layup like a lot of people are saying. I'm seeing these lists of names and I'm like, I maybe I'm wrong, but I don't view the Penn State job the way that people view Ohio State or Alabama or Notre Dame, USC or Michigan, right? Like I think it's a rung below that. So there's probably a little more sales and recruiting that goes into getting the coach to come there.
But what about a name like a Kenny Dillingham or a Brent Key? I haven't really heard. Some people said Dillingham, but I haven't heard anyone say Brent Key with the job that he's done so far at Georgia Tech quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those guys are really good. Dillingham is the interesting one to me, like really creative mind, young guy. He's big into recruiting. Fans love him. Like all of that makes a difference. I think in this, none of that matters though. It's like, do I believe you're going to win me a championship in the next 3 years, period? That's the biggest question they have to ask themselves.
What happens if Pat Kraft calls Urban Meyer? How do you think that conversation goes, Josh?
Well, I'm Urban. I know he likes what he's doing right now. He's got grandchildren. He likes having a house on the water in Florida. So I'm not sure he would come out of retirement. But if he does, don't be surprised if you see me wearing some blue and white on a Penn State sideline somewhere.
You would be wearing the Penn State gear, even though you're an Ohio State guy?
Man, I support my guy. You know, I'm Urban all the way. So I'd have to go out there and show a little love.
You know what? I got to make it a mission. I've said some nasty things about Penn State the last 3-4 years. If Matt Rhule, who's the head football coach at Temple and has been extremely benevolent to me in his career, if he takes the Penn State job, I don't know if I'd wear Penn State gear, but I'd have to root for Penn State. I don't ever think I would wear Penn State gear. Josh Perry, let's get to USC. That was an impressive win for Lincoln Riley, who I think is a tad overrated as a head football coach. Michigan, I'm just waiting for them to have that moment this year, and they really haven't had that moment this year. Your reaction to what did transpire over the weekend?
So I'll hit on Michigan quickly. I was talking to some Michigan people, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that Sharon Moore is doing the learning on the job. Like it feels like, and this is not to be disrespectful, but it feels like he would have been a guy who would have benefited at being at like Central Michigan for a couple of years. It's what coaches used to do. They used to make the mistakes there when nobody was really watching. And then you just see them start to win games and they get hired at a place like Michigan. And with that comes a staff, and not the coordinators, but some of the position coaches, maybe a little bit inexperienced as well. And it adds up for them. So I think he's got to grow as a coach, and he's in a tough spot too. Like the offense doesn't have a lot of options. So if you get behind in the game, what do? You're relying on your defense a ton, but then you run into an offense like what Lincoln Riley had out there on Saturday. It becomes a challenge. Lincoln Riley did the thing that we saw him do so many times at Oklahoma. This was a play calling masterclass. He had the run game humming. The drop back pass game was really good. But the thing that bridged it together for me was the screen game, because it took so much of the aggression away from Michigan's defense. It's a defense that wants to be vertical. The linebackers like running through gaps. And when you're running misdirections, when you hit them with screens, they can't do that. And so that's when you started to see USC really lean on them, hit some of those runs toward the end of the game. I thought it was beautiful. And this was the type of game USC needed to win, because Michigan is the quintessential tough guy in the Big Ten. And I think a lot of us need to see Lincoln Riley beat the bully, and they did.
How do you think USC now responds going to Notre Dame? We know Notre Dame can't afford to lose a game the rest of the year, already having 2 losses.
It'll be a really unique battle. I think both of the quarterbacks in that game are playing really high-level football. CJ Card and Jay Mayava. The Notre Dame defense, like this is going to be their first challenge since they played Miami and A&M, and I'm trying to gauge how much better they are. The travel through the time zones is always a difficult thing. It's something we're going to talk about with cross-country trips we do in the Big Ten. I know it's not a Big Ten game, but they've got to make the travel, so we'll see there. But if USC wins this one, it feels like they're a college football playoff team. Like I think they've got Oregon down the line as well, and we've got questions about them now. So they've created a pathway here, and this is going to be one of the big challenges in order to get into the college football playoff.
Get into Ohio State real quickly, Josh Perry. Tate is a heck of a wide receiver. We know what Jeremiah Smith is too. What is your ultimate read on the quarterback in Julian Sain?
I think he's fine. He's, per PFF, the most accurate deep ball thrower in college football. They just don't do it a lot. And it's because the coordinators that are preparing for Ohio State aren't idiots. I'm actually shocked because I've seen dumb coordinators think that they're just going to go out there and play man-to-man on those guys that you just mentioned and think they can have success or not. So this year they've seen a lot of shell coverage. They've seen a lot of deep zones, and it's forced the offense to look much smaller. But I think Ryan Day has gotten comfortable saying, we'll play the small game, we'll take what's there, and we'll do it in a slower pace. So by time we get to the Big Ten championship and to the college football playoff, we're fresh and we're hitting on all cylinders like we saw them do a year ago. So I think a little bit of this is by design for Ohio State's offense. I also give a lot of credit to defensive coordinators who are saying we're not going to let those really good wide receivers who are all going to be making a ton of money on Sundays come out here and beat us. We're going to make them do it a different way.
How about Hartline? How the heck is this guy not a head coach yet?
It's an interesting thing. He's the best at his craft when it comes to recruiting and developing wide receivers. There's nobody better in college football. He's now a play caller, but there's this question of like, is it Ryan? Is it Hartline? How much of it is him? And so I think as a guy who hasn't really been coaching for all that long, he's still got to grow a little bit just as a coach, which I totally respect. Here's the interesting thing for me about a guy like Hartline. I don't know if hiring a coordinator is the smartest way to hire. Being a great play caller and being a great head coach are very different skill sets. Sure. If you sit down and you interview the guy and you're like, man, he can run a program, he can run an organization, that's when you pull the trigger. And I'm curious over his evolution when he goes into an interview, how he's communicating that. Because if he's a guy who can lay out a plan and say that, hey, listen, I'm going to hire this coordinator, I'm hiring that coordinator, this is our plan, this is how we're going to do nutrition, strength and conditioning, all the different things, why wouldn't you take a chance on a guy like that? Good-looking young guy. He's a great recruiter. It seems like you want him as a face of a program.
Let me get your thoughts on Dan Lanning. I think the world of Dan Lanning. I know when the last year Oregon was in the Pac-12, they lost to Washington twice. Last year, undefeated in the regular season. They win the Big Ten championship. They get upset off the bye to Ohio State. And then this year, right, huge game up against Indiana, and they dropped that one at home. How do you think that Indiana game is going to impact Oregon the rest of the way, or do you just not have any qualms about them?
I really don't have any qualms about them. Like, I do think that there are maybe some concerns now that have been brought into the light. Their offensive line has to play much better, and I think that that's going to be a focus for them. I also question how interested their defensive line is in defending the run at times. And so I think just the lines of scrimmage have to be a bigger emphasis. But Dan Lanning is it's that same position as Sharon. He's a few more years into it, but he's, just a really good young coach, but he still hasn't done the job for very long. There are a lot of things that he's learning on a year-to-year, week-to-week basis. And so these losses, I think, are molding him on how he can prepare better down the line. There have been some big ones. There have been some ugly ones. I still think that we all believe in him because he's a great connector. He's a guy who knows when to take the chances in games usually. And frankly, those types of guys figure it out.
And then also just in the SEC, you have, I think, 10 teams right now in the top 25. Who do you think is the best team in the SEC? Personally, I'm rolling with A&M right now.
Yeah, A&M is the one where I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, and it's a bad way to approach it. Marcel Reed, I feel like, can be hot and cold. And so, like, does he have a bad game? Their third down defense has been ridiculous over the last few weeks. And if that trend holds, like, I'm believing in their defense, but they also give up some yards at times too. For me, it's Alabama. My biggest issue with them is their lines of scrimmage don't look anything like the Nick Saban teams. They don't run it very well. They also don't stop the run very well. But Ty Simpson, I think, is the best quarterback in college football today. And he's throwing it to some aliens out there. And that's still a very talented and athletic roster. Kalen DeBoer, it's also a unique stat. When he was at Washington the year that they went to the national championship, I think he was 8-0 in one-score games. And you're seeing in SEC play where these games are tight, and he's not really panicking. And there's something about being comfortable in close games and just saying, like, I trust my guys to go out there and execute and get a win. So I'm liking Alabama. I'll say this about the SEC. I really don't know how good the top is because I don't know how good the middle is. And a lot of those teams in the middle are playing tight with the teams in the top. So we'll see down here. I think there are a lot of losses to be had. And I think by the end of the year, we'll see some 3-loss teams in the college football playoff, and we'll probably have conversations about a 4-loss team who people think might have gotten snubbed.
And then the last thing I'll ask you, you look back at Red River between Texas and Oklahoma. Mateer probably shouldn't have just played in that game. I know it's a good moment for Texas with the defense and special teams. Arch managed the game, and he finally looked composed. But I appreciate Mateer playing, but it feels as if he probably just should not have played in that one.
So the reason I said that he shouldn't have played is because the playoff committee would have been like, oh, they lost to Texas, but they didn't have Mateer. And that's one of the things that they can use as criteria when they're choosing teams at the end of the year. I feel like if a guy plays, I don't care what percent he is, you're better than the dude who is going to play instead. Like, I'm not grading you on a curve. John Mateer went out there and did a lot of what I think John Mateer does. He is reckless with the football. And if he's not running really well, they're not running the ball at all. So this to me actually felt kind of like what Oklahoma can be when they're just not executing the game plan that they want to execute. But for different reasons, I think Mateer should have sat this one out. I think he should have given himself one more week. I think Brent Venables should have said, there's a high likelihood that we could lose this whether he plays or not, and I'm going to let the playoff committee make the excuse for us when it comes to the end of the year.
He's Josh Perry, one of the best analysts in the country talking college football, NBC Sports, college football. Make sure you check him out, former Ohio State linebacker. Josh, always great to have you on. Thanks for the insight.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.